Welcome back, everybody, to Passage to Profit. Richard and Elizabeth Gerhardt with our special guest, Jason Lee from Dailypay. And Jason, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here. And you've got a fantastic company, a fantastic idea. Why don't you tell our listeners what it's all about?
You know, our company, Dailypay, really solves and addresses a really age-old question, which is frankly probably been asked since the time of Moses, which is, how can we actually control the timing of our pay? In the time of Moses, once said, you should pay everyone their wages before sunset. And so for 30 centuries, payroll has actually happened the same way, for as long as we can remember. All of us have been paid once a week, once every 2 weeks, once every month. And in all kidding aside, in a world where we can wear our pets on our clothing outside, where we can order cars whenever we want, order food whenever we want, it struck us at least, gosh, we ought to be able to use technology to really access our pay also on demand. And not simply because we wanted to access it for frivolous reasons. Actually, 8 out of 10 Americans today are actually living paycheck to paycheck. There is this core issue that exists, which is the asynchronicity between when someone gets paid and when their actual bills are due. God forbid, today's a Thursday, I've got rent due today, I can't pay rent, I'm gonna get evicted, and payday's not until tomorrow. Gosh, I've already worked. I'm just simply waiting to get paid. I ought to be able to use technology to control the timing of my pay. And so that's really what Dailypay seeks to do. It empowers every single American to be able to control when it is that they get paid for hours they've already worked, as opposed to living sort of for this kind of once every 2 weeks, once a month kind of pay event. It kind of creates the fluidity that we all need to meet everyday expenses or everyday life needs that we might have.
I can see many benefits to the employee, but I can see one major benefit possibly to the employer. If somebody knows they're going to get paid at the end of the day, they're much more likely to show up for work that day, right?
So, as I said, we're simple people here. When you treat your employees well, they actually behave differently. And that's a pretty tried and true principle. Treat people well, give them what they need. There's a core compact that exists between the employer and the employee. And that compact is, come work for our company and your needs will be met. That's my job as an employer to make sure your needs are met. Well, that compact has been severely weakened, as we've kind of created this bi-weekly, monthly kind of pay cadence. And so, Elizabeth, you're exactly right. When employers offer this benefit, all of a sudden their employees start staying longer. They start working harder. What we've seen is that retention has gone up on average by 41%. And that's extraordinary. That means someone who might have quit in 3 months, well, she's now going to stay for 5 months. Someone who might have quit in 6 months, she's now going to stay for 9 months. And you add up all that cost benefit for the employer, that's great savings for the employer, which ultimately lead to a benefit for the employee as well. So it's a real win-win when you think about it.
That's really great. And I agree. I think anything that an employer can do that's economical, that can benefit their employees is a big win in my opinion. But how do you manage all of the accounts and all of the employees and all of the employers? You don't have an army of 50,000 bookkeepers, right? So how does this work?
Yeah, so I know you've got a wide berth of folks who listen to the show, and so maybe I'll say it this way: that's the power of technology. The most wonderful thing about technology is you can create scalable, leverageable processes where you don't need 5,000 people running payroll for each individual company. We don't have that here. We're a company of 200 people, and our client base probably spans at this point 2 million Americans. And so you think about the power of the technology that we've created. Let me maybe say it this way. We got this really big computer that figures out how much you worked, and it kind of does a lot of this processing stuff. And it tells you, hey, you earned this amount of money, and if you'd like to access any of it, tap a button, kind of looks like an ATM machine, but sits and resides in the cloud or on your phone. And tap a button, and an instant later, a second later, check your bank account balance. My goodness, the money's there. And that's really our job. It's to kind of take care of all of that work behind the scenes.
So then you're actually the payroll provider for the company, correct?
We actually don't. And again, this is a little bit of kind of the magic of technology. We've created essentially this micro thin layer that actually sits in between the employee and the employer's payroll system. Maybe I can use an example that you're familiar with. Take Uber. What was the power of Uber? The power of Uber was there's this whole supply chain of automobile manufacturing that has never been touched. People make a car, they sell a car, they market the car, there are car commercials, there are all these things involved with the car process. And the end result is someone gets to buy this thing, and you can now drive from your home to your mother's home. Well, what did Uber do? Uber inserted this very thin layer of technology which accomplishes the same purpose without changing the auto manufacturer's supply chain. Essentially now, I get to go from my house to my mother's house. But the process of making cars has not been changed. And so in the same way, the employer runs payroll as they always have. But we've inserted this thin layer which changes the experience for the employee. That employee can now control every aspect of her pay through our technology without the employer changing any aspect of how she runs payroll. No different than when the consumer changes her perspective with the ride.
How many clients do you have now using this?
So right now we have something like 300 companies across the United States, which employ something like 2 million workers. The companies that you might have heard of, large companies like a Kroger. Kroger is the second largest company employer in the country. So Kroger, the big grocery store chain, McDonald's corporate, Six Flags.
So what is the user experience like, on the end of the person who would be coming to you to get a pay advance? And what is the difference between this type of a platform versus like those creepy payday loans?
Yeah. So the great thing about this is, and you can check out how the user experience looks on Dailypay.com. Is it looks and feels like an ATM. Every day you work, your balance goes up, just like a checking account balance. And there's some digital representation that, hey, your balance has gone up. And you kind of look at that thing and you say, hey, I've already earned 300 bucks. That's already my money. My balance has gone up. Gosh, I have rent due right now. Let me tap a button and take out $100. Now that already is my money. And so therefore there's nothing ever to pay back. It is identical to as if when you go to your checking account ATM and you tap a button and take out $100, you don't go back a week from now and try to stick that $100 back in the machine. You don't pay back the machine. Of course you don't. It's because it's your money. And so what we do is really provide a tech-enabled way for you to access your own money that just happens to be sitting at the employer. But it is no different than as if it's coming out of your checking account. Coach Kenya, the reason why it's a little bit different is there's nothing ever to pay back. Meaning the employee doesn't have to come to us and say, here's the money back that I took from you, or we don't go to them and say that. All we just do is simply deduct it out of their paycheck because it already was their money. Think about it as real-time pay.
How would I find out about something like this? Would it be through my employer, or how are people finding out about this as an option?
Yeah, so let me quote the Aflac duck, which is ask your employer. So we only work with employers, and the employer offers it as an employee benefit to their employees. It's a free benefit, so the employer doesn't pay a fee. The employee only pays a fee if, in fact, they request a transfer. So again, no different than like a digital ATM machine. And so for your listeners, for those of you who are employees, just ask your employer about dailypay.com. For those of you who actually work in HR or payroll, things like that, you can come to our site and check it out.
That's great. Jason, so how did you get into this business in the first place, and what is your story?
The reason I got into this was I really observed a fundamental issue in the marketplace, which was I started to think about all of these problems that existed because people could not get paid every day. So around the time that we founded the company, there was a lot of discussion around why is it that the economy is doing so well, but there's this widening income gap and this disparity that exists in America, where income inequality is continuing to increase. That's a very polite way of saying, the rich are getting richer, but on the other side, the not so rich, we're getting more not so rich. And when I dug into that problem, one of the reasons that I figured out was it had to do with the payroll cycle. The payroll cycle is designed to be very rigid and very demanding, where individuals who don't have the money to pay bills on average are paying $1,400 a year in late fees or overdraft fees. Now, for someone who makes $25,000 a year, that's a massive amount of money. Now, all of us may not think about those things here on the phone, but 8 out of 10 Americans are dealing with that. And so, I can't raise minimum wage. I can't get employers to pay more. That's not really what I can do, but what I can do is create technology which puts that money back into the pockets of these Americans. How can we get people to save that money? Then they deploy that in their communities. Then the local economy starts to increase. And that's how we will start to bring back some of these places.
When I looked on your website, it said you were venture backed. Is that right? So
our company is backed by venture capitalists in Silicon Valley Venture.
So how did you get that to happen? Because I think that would be a dream for any tech company, right? So how did that come about for you?
Fundraising, of course, is always a challenge. And a lot of entrepreneurs and founders will ask me, well, how do you get a big VC backing? The first thing I would say is VC is not for everyone. It's one thing to get a lot of funding, but of course, the cost of that is you have to give up a portion of the control. And so, that's always something I remind folks is, I just work here. I founded the company, but I just work here, and I have a team of investors that I partner with. But I'm one of 5-7 voices around the table. But if you were looking and considering that path, what I would advise is, number one, solve a big problem. But number two, have passion about that problem. You can probably tell that I'm deeply, deeply passionate about solving this issue. Because I think that this, I've got a finance background, and so I see the world in a very particular way. Nobody has ever thought about payroll as a problem that creates personal finance issues. Payroll has been one of those industries that hasn't changed, as I said, in 30 centuries. But applying a little bit of financial technology to this problem set can unlock a very different outcome. And so I have a personal passion for solving this issue. So one, solve a big problem. And two, solve it passionately. Then you'll find the right folks to back the company.
So before the show, Jason, you mentioned that you had some intellectual property stories or issues that you were dying to talk about. So I was wondering if you could share that with our audience.
IP is a very, very important asset, for lack of better words, for growing companies. But I'd encourage folks to also look at it the other way. When we started the company back in 2016, there were 2 companies doing what we did. Now there are 30 companies around the world doing what we are doing. And so IP is extremely important, but I wanted to give a contra view, which is also, you'll know if you've tapped into a big market, if you see 29 other companies start to do what you're doing.
Right.
And that's generally a pretty good indicator that you're onto something pretty big.
Right.
Your earlier question, Elizabeth, is probably what will attract venture capital money.
Yeah.
When you have 29 other companies trying to get into your space, yes, that's competition. But that also probably means that 29 other companies have figured out, hey, this could be the next big market.
So your biggest challenge right now is probably marketing, is that right? Because if there are 29 other companies, how do you stand out from and have people use you instead of them, right?
There's no silver bullet. You could think it's marketing, you could think it's product, but for those of you who are in the business of founding, running companies, what I would say it's all the above. It's about execution. You got to have the passion to really run through walls and find this is not helpful to anyone, I know, but find a way to win. And you have to be able to drive through the obstacles. There is no silver bullet. Every situation is very specific to your particular product or problem that you're trying to solve. There are lessons and principles and best practices, but at the end of the day, this comes down to, like, who are my customers and how do I apply these principles to that customer set? And so in our case, Elizabeth, yes, one of the things we do think about deeply is our go-to-market strategy. But I will tell you, even that's evolved probably every quarter in the last 3 years. And so really the key is having a very, very close insight. What are our customers wanting? What are they buying? How are they thinking about this decision? How do I juxtapose that against the state and growth of the market? Because there are certain strategies which applied for us 3 years ago, which frankly, I look at those now and I say, my goodness, what was I thinking? That would not apply to what we're doing today. And so it really is sort of aligning and latching that.